Brains and beauty. On BBC4, we're loving the Avengers each Thursday night at 7. And now some of its stars look back at just what made it so special.
Mrs. Peel, we're needed.
It sounds absolutely pitiful, but all I have to do is hear the theme tune to the Avengers, and I just feel happy.
It's a romp, it's a pantomime really in a fantastical world.
We did new things, exciting things.
Stylish, idiosyncratic and relentlessly camp, The Avengers is one of the best-loved drama series in television history. Throughout the 60s, the adventures of the urbane gentleman spy, John Steed, and his succession of sexy sidekicks was one of Britain's most successful programmes, and it proved as popular abroad as it was at home. It's been shown in at least 120 countries around the world, more than any other British series. For a generation of viewers, The Avengers was synonymous with the style and spirit of the 1960s.
Help! I've lost the picture.
The aerial!
Oh.
Each week, the bowler-hatted gentleman spy, John Steed, aided by his cat-suited and kinky-booted partners, thwarted the schemes of diabolical masterminds.
Trimble!
It's fondly remembered for the flirtatious repartee between Steed and the all-action Avenger girls. But it didn't start that way. When the series began in 1961, the central characters were both men, and it was John Steed, played by Patrick Macnee, who was the sidekick to Dr. David Keel, played by Ian Hendry.
Doctor?
Yeah?
We take him to your surgery.
What for?
It's quieter there.
Yeah, well, I'd like to keep it that way.
That's precisely my point. He's a private patient. That's why I brought you along. Give the police surgeon a night off. Follow me?
The Steed of the earlier episodes is far different from the later Steed that we know. He's a bit of a wide boy. He's got a touch of the thug about him, and he's also quite ruthless. He uses his people as a means to an end.
Is he all right?
He'll live. That's all he always does.
ABC Television's head of drama, the legendary producer Sidney Newman, had been asked to provide escapist entertainment for ITV's Saturday night audience.
We could take a taxi.
Newman recruited some of the country's top screenwriters, but he gave scant guidance to his team.
They called it The Avengers because Sidney Newman said, I don't know what the hell it means, but it's a great title.
The early episodes were tense espionage dramas with little of the kitsch appeal that would characterise the later series. Even so, it was a hit with viewers, in part because it tapped into some of the political preoccupations of the age.
There was an obsession with spies in the 60s. It was an obsession that grew out of the Cold War. It was an obsession that grew out of the fact that we thought there were spies there fighting an undercover war that we wouldn't know about.
Oh, I think you'd be charmed out your hat.
And making him a glamorous but fantastical character. And The Avengers was at the forefront of this.
Despite its success, The Avengers experienced the first incidents of what would become a recurring problem, a desertion by one of its stars. After 26 episodes, Ian Hendry left to pursue a career in Hollywood, and the producers needed to find another partner for Steed.
And I remember we had to look around and somebody said, well, why don't we have a woman? Oh, woman? Because nobody had women in sort of executive or interesting or central positions at all.
The woman they chose to replace Hendry was Honor Blackman, who was cast as the formidable amateur crime fighter Kathy Gale.
In those days, you had the faithful wife at home, or the wicked temptress in the black stockings somewhere else. And they weren't used to writing a woman who was the equal of a man.
That was a new thing in itself, because people didn't get together on a male-female relationship without either having affairs or whatever it was. But to actually get out there and do things together, man and a woman, was unique.
Steed, I am not yours to swap and barter.
Of course not, Mrs. Gale.
What do you think, you're running a slave market?
Yeah, oh no, of course I'm not. Look, I thought you'd grasp at the chance. Chance of working cheek by jowl with Martin?
My cheek is going nowhere near his jowl.
Right from the start, there was a kind of nitro and glycerine effect between the two, striking sparks off each other.
We have got to collaborate, and I cannot do it without you.
Now I see how you got them to agree to that truce. But you're sly, cunning, devious,
Splendid.
scheming.
I'll let him in.
I think she found him attractive, and he certainly found her attractive. And I think she was highly amused at all his advances. And I mean, one of the attractions of the show was, will they, won't they, will they, won't they?
We're just leaving.
The chemistry between the lead characters entranced audiences.
Hey, where do you keep it in there?
Oh, in here?
And as Kathy Gale, Honor Blackman became a sex symbol.
When you watch those episodes with her in them now, she's really quite amazing in a very cool, calm, collected, super intelligent, of course, way.
I think in lesser hands it may not have been so impactful, but with her there, and she imbued the character with a sort of believability, which was tough, because you really had to believe that she could take on men at their own game, and with Honor Blackman you did.
There's really not much point in that now, is there?
Of course she did judo. I mean, this was why it was so extraordinary, because the barrier had always been that a woman could never be the equal of a man, because physically she couldn't defend herself.
She was quite a rare heroine of the time. I mean, it's old hat nowadays because all the women throw people over their shoulders, but it was quite startling then.
It encouraged women tremendously, I think. And it really did, I think, advance feminism. Well, judging by the letters I got. I mean, of course I got a lot from fellas, but I had a lot from women saying, good on you, you know.
And by that time, of course, there was a deliberate plot to heighten the emancipated woman. Then we knew we'd stumbled on a good thing, and so we went with it and exploited it even more.
Hey, what a fine selection of swagger sticks.
Kathy Gale's fighting prowess became one of the features of the series, but the violence was always cleverly stylised. Steed's approach to dealing with ruthless villains was a model of gentlemanly decorum and restraint.
Patrick never carried a gun, as far as I remember. And he always did these ridiculous fights with umbrellas and sticks and stupid things and fencing and stuff. And one of the attractions of the show was that he did that and I did the chap stuff, which was very funny.
Very disarming nature, Mrs. Gale.
Touché.
By the end of the second series, Kathy Gale was established as a strong female icon. Her appeal was enhanced by her distinctively racy costumes, a look which came about by accident.
In one show, I split my trousers with my bottom to the camera in the middle of a fight. And because they got rather worked up about that, and they said that this can't happen again, and we've got to find something that's stronger. And that's how leather was born, only because practically I mustn't split my trousers in front of the camera.
When they started using leather, and as they increased the use of leather, I think there must have been thoughts in the back of their mind that this was an added kinkiness, yet another quirk onto a show that was fast becoming less a thick-eared detective novel and more moving towards the world of fantasy.
At the same time, audiences were thrilled by the exploits of another British spy. The James Bond series was establishing itself as one of the most bankable franchises in the history of cinema. Following her success in The Avengers, it was no surprise when Honor Blackman was poached to play the wonderfully named Pussy Galore in Goldfinger. After Blackman's departure in 1963, The Avengers needed another athletic, charismatic female lead.
Good morning, Mrs. Beale.
Good morning, Steed. The door's open.
They found her in the person of Diana Rigg, who had become immortalised in the role of Emma Peel.
Well, you know what it's like to have an angel come down from heaven? That's what she was. She was just this extra special person, and she happened to light on me, and we happened to get on tremendously well together.
That was very, very dirty.
You're quite right. But I didn't promise to fight fair.
Emma is different from the Kathy Gale character. She has a completely different dynamic with Steve.
Give me a hand, will you?
I love opening other people's cards.
There is a great friendship between them. There's not the antagonism that there was between him and Kathy Gale.
Best wishes for the future, Kathy.
Mrs. Gale. Oh, how nice of her to remember me. What can she be doing in Fort Knox?
Patrick Mooney was tremendously generous. He embraced her coming into the series, and they used to work together so well that in the end they would work on their own dialogue. They would take the script, but then they would look at their scenes, go off together, work up the dialogue, and which sometimes really sparkled.
You like Beresford, don't you?
Yes, why? Don't you?
He has a good line in Clarets, particularly the 29.
He's charming, witty, and intelligent. There's nothing to dislike about him, is there?
No. But if I try hard enough, I'm sure I'll find something.
I think rather like those wonderful Hollywood movies of the 30s and 40s, where sex was never explicit and gentle flirtation kept people titillated. You could sustain a relationship for a much longer period.
Do you find her attractive?
Not a patch on you.
My interpretation was that they had been lovers, and it had been a big wild affair, had fizzled out, and there was no sexual tension had gone, so they could now work in great peace with themselves on the job in hand.
By February 1966, more than 18 million viewers were tuning in to see Emma Peel save Britain from her enemies. Her appeal was universal. Diana Rigg stirred the libidos of young men everywhere and became an empowered role model for young women.
I would have been 6 or 7 when Diana Rigg became Emma Peel in the series, and even though I was so young, I have incredibly vivid memories of watching it at the time. It's impossible to overestimate how dire the portrayal of women was at that time, and suddenly here was this beautiful, brainy, bold, courageous woman, much, much better at judo than Steed, and she just seemed so attractive, so engaging, and so much fun.
Mrs. Peel, you're remarkable.
She wasn't just physical, she was also pretty well equipped. Intellectually, she was as clever as a man at computers. She was very self-sufficient as a woman.
And there's a wonderful sequence in the house that Jack built where she's been plunged into this ghastly, evil, op-art, sort of sick, sinister fantasy by a mad scientist gone bad. And she says to herself, I can reason my way out.
The object of the exercise is to drive me insane. How will you know when you've achieved it? You've made a mistake. You've told me what to expect. Now, whatever happens, I'll know it's a trick.
And this is Mrs. Peel, this startlingly beautiful woman who's also this sort of force for Cartesian rationalism, and both has the moral courage and the strength of character to get herself out of any jam by sheer force of intellect. Fantastic.
By the mid-60s, the Avengers had evolved from an iconic British drama series into a successful global brand. It was broadcast in 40 countries and enjoyed a worldwide audience of more than 30 million viewers. Then, in 1967, it became the first British TV series to be shown in prime time on an American national network, ABC. Though ITV was still broadcasting in black and white, the American sale gave the series enough funds to shoot in colour. It enabled the producers to present a Technicolor vision of England to its new American fans.
I don't think they actually set out to make a show with American appeal, but the Avengers portrayed an England that the Americans wanted to believe in. The classic episodes of the Avengers with Steed and Emma represent two sides of Englishness. There's Steed as the old-style gent with his Bentley and his bowler hat, full of etiquette and very debonair.
Steed, is it time you bought a new car?
I'm loyal to my old loves.
Yes, I know.
Emma represents modernity with her short skirts and her cat suits, and she drives a Lotus Elan, a very modern car.
In both its stories and its style, the Avengers reflected many of the social, cultural and technological changes of the age.
It absolutely sums up the themes that run through the 1960s, the explosion of consumerism, the sort of optimistic era of mod, and this sleek, spruce, streamlined aesthetic for the future, but also the sort of mid-60s ambiguity towards modernity, the sense that science and technology had perhaps gone too far and could be forces for evil as well as good.
Automation to the ultimate degree. Replace man with machine. Subjugate him to it. Now, I couldn't agree to that.
So it very much reflects many of the obsessions, but also the tensions and contradictions of the 60s.
The Avengers reflected the seismic shifts in society and culture in 60s Britain, at a time when the Prime Minister, Harold Wilson, warned of coming upheavals caused by the white heat of technology, when the pill was available on demand, and when Britain was in the midst of a pop culture revolution, The Avengers was a sort of TV counterpart to Carnaby Street. John Steed and Emma Peel were cool Britannia 30 years ahead of time.
Patrick Macnee posed with Twiggy. The Avengers star didn't want to steal the picture. He shared it with the internationally famous model.
It is seen as a sort of iconic series of the 60s, as one of the emblems for Britain in the future, and certainly Emma Peel's car and her incredible clothes absolutely epitomise that.
We were always pursuing the new 60s Britain. I mean, we had to put Diana Rigg in a miniskirt, and we made 3 episodes before it was launched on the market. And we had to take that chance. Will it catch on? And of course it did.
Emma Peel's costumes were created by some of Britain's leading fashion designers, including Jan Rowell, who produced some of the early leatherwear, Alan Hughes, who devised the so-called Emma Peeler suits, and the miniskirt pioneer John Bates.
Emma Peel was one of my first sartorial role models. I mean, her clothes were just amazing. John Bates, the designer who designed most of her wardrobe in the series, was a really interesting designer. There's always been a very vigorous debate among fashion anoraks as to whether it was he or Mary Quant who actually introduced the miniskirt to Britain.
In fashion terms, there hadn't been anything strong on television from a series point of view, so I wanted it to be very modern and very young.
I tried the door, then I heard you playing. Mrs. Peel. Mrs. Emma Peel.
Mrs.?
I've come here to appeal to you, Mr. Courtney.
You certainly do that.
Well, for Diana Rigg, I wanted to do a wardrobe. So when I saw the script, I could then say exactly what she was going to wear for that scene, for that particular episode.
For Emma Peel's fight scenes, John Bates created catsuits made from special high-tech materials that hugged those famous curves.
There's nothing worse than going into fight scenes and having wrinkles and creases going on all over the place. I mean, you want the body to look really athletic.
A very appropriate piece of music, Mrs. Peel. It's a requiem.
The clothes were fetishised in the filming of the series. There's a fantastic episode, and Emma Peel is wearing a particularly dashing John Bates trouser suit with a white peacoat with big black buttons, white pants, and sort of one of her soft roll necks. And as she's driving herself there in one of her many sensational sports cars, the camera actually sort of goes in, it focuses in on her boots, and they are beautiful white leather boots with a black patent stripe.
What on earth do you think you're doing?
They're just gorgeous. You want to wear them straight away.
And you could wear them straight away.
She's just as tough as she's gorgeous. Obviously, he doesn't know an Avenger when he sees one.
John Bates's designs for the series were previewed at fashion shows and then put on sale in some of the country's trendiest boutiques. It was the first clothing range made for a TV series that was adapted for exploitation on the high street, ready to buy when the series was broadcast. And the merchandising potential didn't end there.
The Avengers had quite a bit of merchandising. There was jigsaw puzzles, there were paperback books, there were outfits you could buy, there was the sword stick, the car.
I suppose we were a little avant-garde there because we actually started to bring in an advisor on merchandising, but you know, the companies weren't falling over backwards to exploit what we thought was very exploitable.
In 1967, the Avengers was at the peak of its powers. It's estimated that it was second only to the Beatles as the British entertainment industry's biggest export earner. In the same year, Diana Rigg was nominated for one of American TV's most important awards, the Emmy for Best Actress. But despite this, and after 50 episodes in the role, she left the series. An extra episode was filmed to explain her departure. Emma Peel's husband, who'd been missing, presumed dead, reappears.
Always keep your bowler on in times of stress. And watch out for diabolical masterminds.
I'll remember.
Sad. I was totally devastated. I cried. Devastated.
Goodbye, Steve.
Emma. Thanks.
Diana Rigg had helped turn the Avengers into a national institution, so there was intense competition to succeed her. Hundreds of hopefuls auditioned for the role before the producers made their choice. A relatively unknown graduate of RADA.
The Immaculate Avenger was introducing his new TV teammate. She's Linda Thorson, a 20-year-old good-looker from Canada who joins Patrick Macnee as his third leading lady in the Avengers series.
After I got the part, I got letters from people saying, how dare you think you can take over from Diana Rigg? We're not going to like you, we're going to hate you, and lots of mean things.
She won't be an Emma Peel or Kathy Gale. Tara will foil the bad men with femininity. She's got plenty of that.
I mean, she was puppy young, innocent, a bit wide-eyed, and they were all good things. I thought, well, she can't be karate and all that, so I invented a new form that she, instead of throwing a man over her shoulder, she carried a brick in a handbag. She actually predated Margaret Thatcher, the wicked handbag.
Following the two girls that made such an impression, I think the Tara King character had to be different, and I think perhaps there was desperate attempts to make her different from the other. They tried different hairstyles, they put her in different clothes.
With Tara King, she almost became subservient again. She was a much girlier girl, so much more conventionally feminine, and it tended to be Steed who got them out of the pickles.
And perhaps you'll understand why I don't feel too well.
Among insiders, there was concern that Linda Thorson lacked the athleticism required to be an all-action Avenger girl.
Linda was inclined to put on weight. We've gone from the lithe to the curvaceous.
There was a lot of worry about the fact that I, had breasts, I think.
Thanks, Tara.
So I was sent away to lose weight. Eventually they put both Patrick and myself on diet pills. So we didn't eat, but we were high as kites because it was speed that we were on. We certainly could work hard.
After Rigg's departure, the appeal of the Avengers declined. To stop the rot, they introduced plot lines that were increasingly outlandish.
As the Avengers continued, it became increasingly kitsch, camp and fantastical, and so really having established credibility with the audience and persuaded them that the series was so enjoyable that they could suspend disbelief without feeling like total chumps. The Avengers then ran with that.
I think in the Linda Thorson era, the show moved even further away from any vestiges of reality towards outrageous fantasy. I think as a whole, although probably that series is as good as anything else on TV at the time, it doesn't match up to the earlier series of the Avengers.
Can you get us down?
Eventually, yes. I still think I can.
After 33 episodes with Linda Thorson as Tara King, the American network ABC pulled out. The series remained popular in Britain, but it was too expensive to produce without its foreign investors. In September 1969, ITV aired the final episode of The Avengers.
They'll be back. You can depend on it.
And sure enough, 7 years later, The Avengers did return.
It's difficult to keep a successful series down, and The Avengers was very successful, so it was inevitable they would try and resurrect it, and they did.
Joining John Steed for the new Avengers was Purdy, played by the glamorous, long-legged former model Joanna Lumley. In a departure from the earlier series, they cast a third Avenger. Gareth Hunt was Mike Gambit.
Pat was 10 years older, and he put on a bit of weight, which he later lost. And I thought, well, what I need is a young man who'll be legs for him. So Gareth and Gambit was the legs.
I always remember Patrick saying to me, "Dear boy, the biggest stunt I ever do is getting in and out of a car." Whereas Gambit would have dived out of the car. It was a rough time, and I always wanted to play him so you never quite knew what went on in his past life.
Where the original Avengers had been a duet, the new Avengers was a ménage à trois. But in Purdy, the dynamic female presence remained.
I think Joanna Lumley was a great choice for a new Avengers girl. Once again, they tried to make her look as different as possible from the previous incarnations.
When Jo tested her, she had long hair. And one day she went off just before we started shooting and came back with the Purdy cut. We were like this. We didn't know what to say. But she said, "Don't worry, it'll be the fashion any minute now." And I thought, well, that's good, because we always, well, it's like taking the miniskirt unknown. And of course it did. And within a couple of weeks, everybody wanted a Purdy cut.
You know, the haircut, it was a big thing at the time. I remember when it happened, everyone was going nuts about this haircut. And it's like,
I think at the time it was supposed to be kind of cut like a prep school boy's hair.
Yeah.
But it gradually got stranger and stranger. It was mandatory in Holland. I went there and just wasn't a person without it on.
The new Avengers was a rating success, reaching 13 million viewers. But to some fans, casting it as a threesome robbed the series of its sparkle.
Looking back to the 70s when the New Avengers came out, it was actually sort of fun telly. But even at the time, it was evident that it didn't have the same freshness and impact as the old Avengers.
In 1977, after 26 episodes, the New Avengers came to an end. In 1998, Hollywood revived the brand in an adaptation starring Sean Connery, Uma Thurman and Ralph Fiennes. But critically and commercially, it flopped. Yet, for die-hard Avengers fans, the film version hasn't tarnished the memory of this highly innovative TV series.
The Avengers, it really delivers purely escapist entertainment.
It was kind of like Disneyland in a sense, and people felt safe in it.
Loved for its stylish look, its subtle dialogue and its adventurous plots, for over 40 years The Avengers has entertained millions of fans around the world.
He's had some kind of nervous breakdown.
And it'll always be remembered as the series that allowed women to be strong for the very first time.
The Avengers is absolutely iconic, if ever television can claim to be.
We did it before anybody else. We were first. That's exciting.
And don't miss The Avengers with Patrick Macnee and Diana Rigg each Thursday at 7 here on BBC4. And there's another chance to see the first episode tomorrow at 11:30. Tonight, though, Tales from the Palaces next.